Order. Let's get everyone mic'd up first. All right, let's call to order. This is going to be City Council workshop for City of Port Richey. It's a budget workshop for Tuesday, August 13, 2020. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mayor Scott Tremblay.
Here.
Vice Mayor William Dittmer.
Here.
Councilwoman Jenny Sorrell.
Here.
Councilman Tom McClary.
Here.
Councilman Tom Kinsella.
Here.
City Attorney James Matthew.
Here.
City Manager Leonard Sossaman.
Here. There was a sign-up sheet for comments from the general public. No one has signed up. I do see members of the general public. By show of hands, would anyone like to approach the podium and speak? Mr. Mueller, 3 minutes on the clock, please. Thank you.
Dave Mueller, 5439 Blue Point Drive. I had an opportunity to kind of glance through this thing. I'm hoping a lot of questions will be answered, and maybe it's more appropriate to save those for later. But I would like you guys to consider zero-based budgeting for all of this stuff going forward against what we spent last year, and justify every position to squeak every dollar and dime out of our current position. I think that the residents warrant that much, and that that would be a good exercise to looking at where we stand as a city, realizing that we're going to move forward with a new city manager at some point in time, and potentially all of these positions, whether they're assessed now, and I'm saying positions, but expenditures, or whether they're assessed now for the merits or at some future point in time, we need to be good stewards, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to look at this and ensure that we're getting the best bang for our buck. And I ask that you all keep an open mind, go through that. I realize that this might be a difficult time for some and all, but in the end, I think it's the residents that need to weigh in on where we go and what we're spending our resources on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Were there any other folks from the public that would like to speak? Seeing no hands, let's move on to comments from the city manager. Any comments, preliminary comments?
The only comment tonight would be that I know you all got the budget late today, and we apologize for that, but the guy to my immediate right, George Setlines, is a person I've dragged out of retirement one more time. He's been an OMB director for City of Crystal River for about 9 years, and then worked over in Hernando County since OMB. Can you hear me okay?
No, you're not on.
Should be working. Anyway, he was, like I say, at Crystal River as their OMB director for 9 years, and then about 18 years or so in Hernando County as its OMB director. And part of that time I knew him. He worked for me for about 7 years. And so when I got here and found out there was no finance director for a year and a half, I tried to scurry around to find somebody, because I also found out at the time when I stepped in, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, that very little work had been done on the budget. And so I needed somebody who could hit the ground running, knows the rules and regulations, and would be able to help me and staff that we have put together a budget to present to you all. So George has been on the deck less than me. He's been here about 4 weeks. So usually we would start probably in late February, early March, putting a budget together to be adopted in September of that year. So with that being said, whenever you're ready, I can introduce, well, I've just introduced George, so you know his name, George Setline. And I think he's a good man, very honorable, and I'll leave him to your good wishes tonight.
Thank you. Welcome to the city, George.
Okay, good. I just want to leave it on in case they get asked a question, they'll hear me.
We were going to go on to comments from mayor, city council. I had no comments. I'm going to pass it around if there's any preliminary comments.
I'm going to reserve my comments for now and questions for now.
After the presentation. Okay. Same. Okay. At this time, we're going to move on to the agenda, council business. It looks like the council business is going to be the review of fiscal year 2021, and that's going to be the budget workshop. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to Mr. Sossaman.
Hopefully that worked. Is that better? Excellent, excellent. As I was stating earlier, George Zetline is a seasoned veteran when it comes to budgets. What I did leave out was early in his career, after moving down from New Jersey, he worked here in Pasco County in their finance OMB office for about 6 years prior to taking the directorship as the finance director for city of Crystal River. And then, obviously, after 9 years there, to Hernando County for another 18 before retiring. So he's put this together. It is a proposed budget. We've had very little time. I know about the only thing that had been done prior to me getting here was the CLA folks had met with some of the department heads and budgets had been turned in. So what he's tried to do is do a compilation of those to present to you, and also, I guess, find us a handle on the revenues and expenses expenses that have been requested and revenues that we're anticipating coming in from obviously from the millage, as well as some of the state share taxes. So with that, if it's appropriate, Mayor, I'd like to have George to start and go through the budget. And as I've indicated to at least one council member, since you've just got it today and had very little time to look at it, he'll answer all your questions, and whatever we can't answer tonight, then we'll bring back at the next budget workshop. George.
Okay? Can you hear me all right, I guess?
Yes.
Sorry. That one. Thanks for the introduction, Len. I apologize for, only had about a month to put the budget together. In fact, after all the years doing budgeting for like 30-something years here in Florida, whether it's municipal or county government, I've never once had to put a budget together in about a month's time. So I apologize for any little errors I might have here or there. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And call me George if you want, because I know my last name's a little hard to pronounce, so George will be just fine. So might as well get right into it and get going with it. In fact, I even call the budget process on warp speed, because there's so many questions to answer and too little time to do it in. And like Len was saying, you guys were without a finance director for about 1.5 years, and some work had been done by an outside firm, but it's not like having somebody in-house day-to-day operations to know what's going on, has the feel for the city in that. Like, it's even hard for me, only being here about a month or so, to get the feel for the city and how it operates and things like that, to actually put a budget together and try and work it into the way the city works as a whole. But we're going to give it a shot, and if you have any questions, just ask me, and if I don't know it, I'll be happy to get back to you in it, and we'll do the best we can just to go through this, and hopefully it'll make some sense to you when I talk to you about it. So let's get going with this. First thing I got, the first page here, I noticed they've had this in the past, is accomplishments that were completed this year or in the process of being completed. They continued the reduction of bulk water purchase from Newport Richie, purchase of new public works utility vehicles. There was an F-550 dump truck and an F-250 pickup. Upgrade to water treatment plant, continuous upgrade to city parks, purchase of new police vehicles and equipment, 6 of which have been already purchased and due for delivery in about October. There's a purchase of a new fire engine that's to be delivered in November of 2020. New CAD system for the police dispatch will be in effect August to September of 2020. US 19 medium landscaping continued residential grant program, continued annual mangrove trimming. I'm not familiar with any of this, but if you have any questions, department heads are here. if you'd like to have anything answered about what was being done this year or what the process is going on between now and the end of the fiscal year. The next thing we want to turn to is activities that are planned for next fiscal year. And again, I apologize for not being quite up to date with it, because in fact, I really even have a chance to meet with each of the department heads because of the short notice and everything. But what I understand is they're looking to dredge channels 1 and 26A with the Restore Act money. Should that come in, Nix Park boat ramp repair is going out for bid. Paving of Clark Moody, I assume that's a street in Port Ritchie. Continue upgrades to city parks, repair and upgrade tables, continued annual mangrove trimming, continued upgrades to the water production and distribution system, continued upgrades to police vehicle fleet, continued a residential grant program, purchase of new public works utilities, a crane truck, utility trucks, and trucks for the water plant operator. And again, Sean is here, so if you have any questions, he'll be able to answer all your questions about any of this, most of the stuff that's on this list here. And if you need, just stop me anytime you want if you have a question of that. I'll just ramble on if you don't just say, hold on, George, hang on a second, or something like that. Next page, I know it's a little hard to see, it's the organizational chart. Mr. Sossaman is projecting a couple of changes to the organizational chart coming up in the coming year. We can speak about those. In fact, I'm going to the next page is basically the changes that we're looking at right now. Again, with such little time to put the budget together, this current budget you're looking at right now, proposed budget, there are no salary increases recognized in this budget at all. So all salaries are frozen to the same what they are right now. There's no increase in there, 1%, 2%, or 3%. We could talk about that if you want later on. Mr. Sossaman would like to delete the assistant city manager's position. If you have any questions on that, he's here to answer them. We're also looking to split out the finance HR department into 2 separate departments, one for finance and one for HR. I know Becky's been doing a tremendous job the month I've been here, all by herself, handling both those things, plus risk management, plus IT, plus just about everything else around here. So she's been a lifesaver around here for you guys, at least the past month or so I've been here, and I'm sure she's been doing it for the last year and a half, basically. We want to go ahead, if we're going to split the departments out, we'd like to create a human resources manager on the HR side, and then you'll have the finance director on the finance side, along with a finance clerk or finance specialist that can help out on both sides. The fire department is asking to hire 3 new firefighters. They're trying to bring their ISO rating better off. I don't know if it's down or up, but I think to get a lower reading is a better rating. And to do that, you have to put 3 men on a truck. So what they'd like to do is try to get to be 3 men on a truck per shift to help with the rating. I think the optimum, from what I understand, is probably 4 men on a truck nowadays, but that's almost impossible to gear up to something that high. And those are the personnel changes we're looking at for next year that are in the budget, that are contained in the proposed budget we have here for you guys. The next one we just wanted to run through, and I guess it's going to be a little hard to see there with it's a little dark, is just the personnel, we can look through them quick, I'll just flip through them. Like under city council, you have the residents, then followed by the mayor and council members, and then followed by the city attorney. In administration, you have the city manager, who's over the city clerk and the executive administrative assistant. In finance department, if it's split out, it'll be the city manager over the finance director and the finance clerk. In the police department, you have the city manager that acts as the police commissioner, who's over the police chief, who has an administrative assistant. There's a captain. There's six departments under the police department. You have records, police service tech. You have the sergeants, detectives, dispatch, code enforcement, and you also have 10 patrol officers, and you have part-time patrol reserve officers also. Fire department, you got again the city manager over the fire chief. Then it breaks down into 3 shifts. You got a captain on each shift. You got a driver engineer on each shift. You got a firefighter EMT on each shift. And then you have 15 part-time firefighters and 25 volunteer firefighters. And again, Chief's here if you have any questions about that. Building department, you got the building official and the zoning administrator and the building permit tech. The new department would be HR, and that'd be by the city manager, would have be the human resources manager. And of course, I believe maybe that finance clerk would be split between the two of them, because they'd be able to help out with both of them. Utility billing, of course you got the city manager, you got utilities director, utilities billing supervisor, which has two utility billing clerks. Public utilities, again, you have the utilities director, utilities foreman, and you have 7 utility crewmen. Water treatment plant, you have utilities directors over 2 water treatment plant operators. Public works, you got the utility directors over public works foreman and 5 public works crewmen. And that basically goes over all the departments under the city right now. If there's any questions, like I said, the department heads are here to answer any questions if you like of them, or we can wait till later to answer questions. It's up to you.
Actually, I have one question on the fire department. You, according to the layout, you're requesting another 3 personnel to be added. Is that inclusive? I guess my question is, we have 15 part-time personnel. Do we need another three full-time on top of that, or is that?
So that, that layout, I guess, is a little deceiving. It was the first time I'd seen that. You actually right now have a fire chief, one captain per shift, and 1 driver engineer per shift. The 15 part-time firefighters only fill in if one of those full-time people are out on vacation. That's because we're such a small agency. When somebody took vacation, our overtime costs would be through the roof. So what we do is we hire guys from Pasco County, Newport Richey, and they come and they work part-time for us, and they fill in for one of those 2 guys are out. What we're asking for is to make that a 3-man engine. So you'll have a captain, a driver engineer, and a firefighter EMT, like that says. And then we'll still have those 15 part-timers that will fill in, but you'll actually bring costs down. Because what we'll do is, instead of right now, when we have a call out or when we have somebody go on vacation, we have to fill it with part-time. What we'll do is, because it's a 3-man engine, we'll down it to a 2-man engine. And the only time the part-time will be used is to fill in the necessary situations where we've had 2 call outs, or we've had something, like for instance, the coronavirus. If we were to have 2 people leave, we can now fill in those people. So there'll always be 1 full-timer there, and then the part-timers will fill in. But currently right now, it's 2 people on the engine each day, and that's it. And the part-timers only fill in if one of the full-timers is on vacation or sick.
What's changed with the standards where we don't meet the standards now, but we have in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years with 2 on each shift versus 3?
They haven't changed. They haven't changed. This has been something that's been put into 10-year plans, 5-year plans. And we brought it up to Mr. Sossaman this year, and he said, well, let's put it in front of the council and see what they say. NFPA 1710, which we're not an NFPA state, recommends 4 people per engine. We're at 2. All of our neighboring agencies typically run 3 to 4. The city of Newport Richey runs a 3-man engine, but they have 2 3-man engines. We only have 1 fire truck for the city because we're a little bit geographically smaller than them. And then Pasco County runs a 4-man engine. Their tax base is much higher. Their tax base is this. We're just asking to see if we can potentially go to 3 guys to help us out on our side, because pulling up to a structure fire, the one state law that is a Florida Administrative Code is a 2 in 2 out policy. So on the 2 in 2 out policy, what it says is for every 2 firefighters inside of a structure, there needs to be 2 firefighters outside of the structure. Previously, how we got away with that was we had a deputy chief and a fire chief. So the captain and the driver would be on scene, and the deputy chief and fire chief would be there. That we've had the deputy chief position removed from our positions, and now all we have is a fire chief. So this will help where the fire chief will still count as that 4th person coming to the scene, but 3 guys will be coming on the fire truck. So your initial engine coming to the fire scene will have 3 guys. Your officer takes command of the control of the scene. Your driver starts the process of securing your water source, getting the scene equipment ready, and then your firefighter stretches your line, starts initial fire tech, and then your fire after his initial walk, your officer, excuse me, after his initial walk around, will then pair up with that firefighter and be able to enter that structure and make an attack on the fire.
And you guys also have, it looked like 25 reserve
So we have-
firefighters?
We have 25 volunteers. Of those 25 volunteers, only 3 are state-certified firefighters that can actually fight fire. In the state of Florida, you have to be at least firefighter 1 to engage in firefighting activity. So one of the things that we've tried to do is when you look at our guys in fire gear, if you see somebody with a modern style helmet that says support on the side of it, they can't engage in firefighting activity on the fire scene legally. They have to stay within the cold zone, so they have to stay out of the immediate area, and they can do support functions. So yes, we have 25 volunteers, but of those volunteers, only 3 are legally allowed to fight fire. And with those volunteers coming up, a lot of those volunteers that are in those positions now will probably eventually be picked up by a fire department. So those numbers go up and down as fire departments hire. A lot of the volunteers that do come in, get their certifications, use us, and then they'll move up, and then they'll get hired by a career agency.
You said previously you had a fire chief and a deputy fire chief, and that maintained your rating. What's to prevent, instead of hiring 3 firefighters, promoting or hiring one deputy chief and go back to the status quo?
So that was one of the things we did discuss, that if we aren't able to get the 3 firefighters, that we would put a deputy chief position in there. Your deputy chief position, the numbers might be exactly off, but I want to say for 3 firefighters, it added about $130,000 to your budget to add 3 firefighters. Deputy chief starting salary is probably going to be around $60,000, and that's not even fair compared to the area, but that's what we talked about. And then with benefits and everything else, 3 firefighters just makes more sense than having a deputy chief, because now we're top heavy and not man heavy, to where we don't have those working guys there that are able to come in, fight fire, and do those stuff. Those deputy chief fans are more of a command position.
Yeah, but you're just talking about salary, but you still have benefits and insurance and retirement for 3 new people in a small city. So that's a big expansion for a small city.
So we had a total general fund, total budget increase, and I can break it down to more of about $160,000 between Penny for Pasco and general fund. And the wages, I don't know exactly maybe George can help what exactly it was to hire each firefighter. To break down for the 3. But that's where we're at with that side. So we gave 2 proposals. We said, hey, we would like 3 firefighters, 1 firefighter per shift. It'll help our ISO rating on our initial response. That's a benefit to the city residents. An ISO rating is how you guys get your insurance, how your fire rating. There's 2 things that you put on your insurance, your flood and your fire protection. ISO is a direct correlation with that. Right now we're in ISO 4. So we could, of that ISO rating, 50% is a water source, which we have great water. 40% is the fire department, and then 10% is the dispatch agency. Of that 40%, roughly 30% of that 40% is personnel. They want to know how many guys you have going to a fire, because 2 people legally don't have, it's hard to engage. We do it, we've always done it, and we'll continue to do it. If you guys so choose not to do this. We just had this in our plan, and we put it in front of you guys tonight.
So these 3 people basically affect 13% of our ISO rating.
Correct, 13%.
So the other 87% is items totally outside of this firefighter.
50% is our water source of that coming in. 10% is dispatch.
Yep, so that's 60.
Yeah, and then the rest is
30% of the 40 is
equipment,
about
yeah,
27%.
Equipment, training, education, experience. That's how it breaks down inside those areas. So.
Okay.
Back to George.
Okay. All right, next thing I want to talk a little bit about the type of governmental funds there are. There are basically 5 major types of government funds. You got your general fund, which we know that's your everyday operation. General fund serves as the primary operating fund for current growing operations. It's used to account for all current financial resources except those that are required from a different or administrative action to be accounted for in another fund. You have special revenue funds. That's exactly what they say they are. There are funding that you get that can only be used for a specific purpose. That's why it's called special revenue. When that revenue comes in, it can only be used for that purpose. It can't be used for, say, just general operations. It's got to be used on that one particular, for one thing. Your perfect example of that is your CRA funds. I mean, that's a special revenue fund that those funds are supposed to be used in the CRA district. I know you have your whole city is a CRA district, but there are certain requirements that those funds can only be used for certain things in the city. Another type of fund you don't have any right now is debt service funds. Should you ever go out for a bond issue, and usually that's for some major expansion or something like that, new city hall, new firehouse, something like that. Basically, if you go out for the bond issue, you create a debt service fund, and that's where you would funnel the money into to make the debt service payments, the bond payments every year. You got your proprietary funds. Those are basically funds, you have two of them. You have your water and sewer and your stormwater utilities. They're treated like any other businesses. They're based on, they operate off of fees for service. So it's actually run, and the accounting is actually done for it just like you were in your own business on the outside. And then the other type of fund you have is capital improvement funds. Those funds are used to account for financial resources to be used for the acquisition of construction or major capital facilities. Again, going back to the debt service funds, if you were to make a bond issue and you were going to build a building or something like that, the payments for the bond issue come out of debt service. The cost of the building would go under a capital improvement fund account for the department. And those are the major accounts that you have right now in the city, those 5 types. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I put together a pie chart. It'll be the only chart you're going to see in this whole presentation. Didn't have time to do some, plus I don't know if you like pie charts or not. I can put a whole mess together for you for the first public hearing or next workshop of that. But looking at the pie chart by fund, you can see that basically 39% of your budget is made up. The general fund makes up 39% of the budget. The CRA, community redevelopment, makes up 19% of the budget. The utility fund is 30% of the budget. Stormwater is only 3%. Impact fees is 6%. And the penny for Pasco makes up about 3% of your budget. So that's how basically your funds divide out. And looking at the fund totals, general fund for next year would be just under $8 million, $7,939,448. The community redevelopment is $3,804,659. The penny for Pasco is $691,492. Impact fees, which I'll break down on the next slide, come to a total of $1,196,840. Your utility fund, which is water and sewer, is $6,068,610, and your stormwater utilities is $605,108. So total budget for next year we're looking at proposed at is $20,306,157.
So when you're talking about the total budget, you're talking about the total amount of money we expect to come into the city?
Total money into the city and total money spent out of the city.
Both, okay.
Yeah. And also, a lot of these funds also have reserves set aside in them for also. And we'll get to that later.
What millage is that based off of?
This millage, right now, this budget is based off a millage of 1.5 mils higher than what you currently have, which is, it's 7 point, I'm sorry. You got it. Yeah, it's based on a millage rate of 7.2847, which is 1.5 mils higher than your current millage rate, which is 5.7847. Okay, going to the next page. Basically, I talked about impact fees, where you see the total for impact fees was 1.1 million, 1.2 million almost. Police impact fees has about $10,000, a little over $10,000 in it. Fire impact has another $34,000. Transportation impact fees is $48,000 roughly. Water impact fees is $365,000 budgeted, and sewer impact fees $738,000. So that's how you come up with, you're just short of $2 million for impact fees. And again, these are perfect examples, again, of special revenue funds too, because the impact fees can only be used where they're collected and for what the purpose was they were collected for, and they're only used for growth. And then we got a number of, there's actually 4 funds out there right now that are showing no activity, and we have nothing budgeted in them for next year right now. You got your police confiscation fund. From what I understand, it's been quite some time since you've actually confiscated any property or vehicles or anything like that you would get money from. So there's really no money available in the confiscation fund right now because you haven't any drug raids or anything like that, from what I
Let's get to
understand.
work.
Excuse me?
Let's get to work.
There's a police training fund. I do have, I'm going to be working on that one. I didn't get a chance to get to it. I understand there may be a code that says that so much of your red light ticket goes to police training. And if that's the case, then we could start that fund back up with, we can calculate how much money would be coming in for police training based on the red light tickets of that. Capital fund, like I said, right now you have no major capital projects in the pipe, so there's really no money in the capital fund right now, and stormwater impact fees have no money in it right now either. So those are funds that are out there that if should money come in those, we could always start them up. That's no problem. But right now I haven't budgeted anything there because there's really no revenue coming into any of them as we speak of it right now.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
When we send our cars down to the impound, when we impound the cars and we send them down for resale, where does that money, we don't get much from them, I know, but where does
Right.
that go? It doesn't go into police company?
I don't believe that considered confiscation money of that. Talk to your lawyer.
It's
with it.
not?
Yeah.
No, those are impound fees. Confiscation is the taking of personal property in furtherance of a criminal activity and then keeping that. This confiscation fee was set up during the issues we had with the impound lot that the FDLE came in on. And the monies for the impounding were going through the confiscation fund, and it was left over and gone. So that's where that fund came from. They raised, just so you want to know why it doesn't happen a lot, you think we'd get some car or something somewhere. Used to be just a few dollars to file a petition for confiscation. You have to go into the court and have a hearing and things. I'm simplifying stuff. They've raised it to a minimum of over $1,000. So, generally, you're going to get some bad, ugly cars, but we haven't got any big Lamborghinis or anything, and so we'll just do that. And since it's a relatively modest amount of money, you don't need a special fund for it. We haven't done it in
So there
2 or 3 years.
impound fee?
I'm sorry?
The cars come under impound?
Cars that we send out for impounding you vote on them as surplus, comes into the general fund. Yeah, so that's just general fund money. That's where it's always gone to.
As a separate question, I know we recently had some drug busts or something of that nature where they did confiscate some money. Does that go into the fund, or what happens with like monies confiscated from?
There's a,
And I don't know, I'm gonna ask, yeah.
I was going to say, you could probably answer that better.
I handle this as part of my law practice, so I can tell you that what has to happen is the city would have to file an action with the circuit court locally. We'd have to pay the filing fees. There's a lot of expense involved in the litigation. So it's a cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not the city would want to get involved in that. Generally, the cost of that litigation costs as much as what she sees, which is probably why our city doesn't engage in that.
So it's incredibly expensive, so you need a lot of money seized in order for it to
be worthwhile.
Worthwhile, okay.
That having been said, that's something that, normally a chief of police and city attorney, those are discussions that they will probably have on a case-by-case basis to see whether or not it's worthwhile, I would think.
Is there like a sweet spot number, like 5 grand, 10 grand, 100 grand? I mean, just out of curiosity.
In my experience, if you have anything between 6 grand and more, you may want to look at it, depending on what it is, but that's just from my practice.
Obviously, it's their decision process, but I'm looking for money, so.
So, but that's just from my 10 years of practice doing it. Normally we don't, on either side, mess with it unless it's 5, 10 grand or more. But there's also some federal case law that's really restricted the amount of money that can be taken on each case. And what has happened, for example, if you get caught with a third-degree felony drug case, the maximum amount of fine by law is $5,000. So what the courts and dicta have been saying, in essence, is that you shouldn't seize more than $5,000, even if you seize $20,000, because that's more than the maximum penalty would be. So there's a lot of new, I shouldn't say legislation, it's actually case law coming down the pike that's restricting what can be seized or forfeited. So those are all things that would be costly to litigate. So I don't, I'm sure that's probably why we haven't done it.
Just to add that not all criminals lose. You know what I mean? You start this process, pay the $1,000 right out of the box, and guys like this gentleman here win the case, and then you don't get your stuff.
Take one for the team.
Yeah, that's right. We'll talk about it.
Okay, thank you all.
Okay,
I have a question on the police training fund. My understanding, it's always been that a portion of a citation is dedicated to the police training or goes to that fund. My question, if it's been so, if this has been the way, where has it been going then, if the city's been receiving it?
well, again, looking at it from my point of view, I don't know where prior years have been going. I guess training's been done out of the general fund for the police department, but for this police training fund, if it is true that says we're supposed to put the $5 away, I have to work on that next year. I'll come back to you probably before the first public hearing to let you know how much money we could probably collect out of that $5 based on the number of traffics that are issued. I think it's, I don't know how many, I have to look and see how many traffic red light camera tickets you issue a year.
I could explain that. To give you a better answer, Mr. Kinsella, I don't know of any $5 we get from tickets by the police out on the street or anything. There's a $5 mention in our code regarding red light traffic camera tickets, which is different than the monies that come in on general motor vehicle charges. That $5 ordinance was in effect before the Mark Wendell, I think that's what they call it, a revision of the red light cameras, in which we used to make a lot of money off the red light cameras, and they statutorily determined how much money we can charge, and now $75 goes to the city. Okay, so to actually take $5 of that and not pay it to the city, if the city wanted to transfer $5 per ticket to the police, they could do it, but that's no difference here. You're setting the budget. You want to give them $400 more or not, you know, it's just a mathematical thing. It's general fund money. Whether the city wants to give it to them is up to.
But if you want to set aside a separate
Yeah, you
fund,
can set a fund if you wanted to, but I guess my point is, to take that money in, they're going to take it into the general fund because the state legislature passed that law, said the $75 comes here. It used to be different. We used to get a percentage. But they took away the incentive for speeding up the yellows or whatever.
But just going off memory, I think for past years, our budget line item for police trainings, I think right around $2,000 a year, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. It's the two separate things, the training fund, and then there's a red light camera fund. And the red light camera fund, from my understanding, is that it's separate and above the training fund. So when I first looked, there's only a $2,000 for training. And that's clearly insufficient, especially in this day and age. We look for grant funding and trust funded classes and things like that. However, training, as you well know, is not cheap and it's not free all the time when you have to send someone to a class that's out of our jurisdiction, because you have to take into account the cost for the class, the per diem, the travel expenses, if there's a hotel accommodation, things like that. So you could basically, on that $2,000, that could be one class for one officer. So.
And have you made any efforts to, because there's free training out there, whether it be in-house training by certified officers that we have and or other organizations that are local, have you explored any of those?
Yes, we've met with Sheriff Naco and Colonel Harrington last week, as a matter of fact, and we are going to, once they we're all doing the virtual training right now because of COVID, so there's not a lot, if any, in-person training that's taking place. So we're going to be on board with them when they get started again. So that's not going to be a cost to us. We also look for grant-funded, trust-funded courses that we can take through IBTM and other agencies. My former agency is also going to allow us to have a couple of seats in some of the training that they're putting on. But again, it's still a ways away. Pasco's not doing any of the in-person training either. So, but just moving forward with all the reforms that they're trying to put on law enforcement, we're going to have an increase in the training budget in order to keep up.
Thank you, Chief. I was going to go back to George if there's no further questions.
Okay, just to reiterate again, your general fund is your general administration fund. Special revenue funds, there's 4 of them listed there, but like I told you, there's only 2 of them that are active right now, is the CRA and the Penny for Pasco. The other ones we're holding in, should we ever need them in the future. There's no debt service funds right now. Under your capital improvement funds, the only thing really that shows up there again is your impact fee funds. Again, the capital fund, there's nothing in there right now, and the sewer, I'm sorry, one of the stormwater impact fee has no money in it right now, but the other ones do have certain amounts in it, and we just went over them a couple of minutes ago. And then you got your 2 proprietary funds, which are run like a business, which is your water and sewer utility and your stormwater utility fund. All right, so now let's get back down to some of the meat now of the actual budget of the revenues sources and that. You have a summary page there on the revenues coming in. You can see that there's actually on revenue side, they're divided into about 6 or 7 different groups or categories for the different monies that come in. As you can see, the general funds budget is just under $8 million, and the taxes, the ad valorem taxes, that's a combination of the ad valorem taxes that you'll be charging next year should you go along with that millage rate, plus delinquent ad valorem taxes, which hasn't been paid, which is about $85,000 we have budgeted for that for next year. Other taxes, if you want, we could go over them. Basically, you got your fuel tax refunds, you got your half-cent sales tax, local option fuel tax, franchise fees, utility electric, utility gas fees. Those are all taxes that are out there that make up that 1.3 million. Again, we can go down them if you want or take them aside. The one thing I'm going to talk about in a minute is the balance forward cash. But just going back to this revenue funds, there's your general fund, there's your community redevelopment funds. We keep that kind of separate because it's kind of a special fund you have out there, especially with the whole city being the CRA. Your special revenue funds, that's capital improvement, water and sewer, stormwater, and the total. Basically, based on this proposed budget, you're looking at about a $20.3 million budget for next year.
Can I ask you a question? The one variable that I think is going to be of great concern to the public and to the people in our community is that ad valorem general fund. The 2.243566 number is based on the 7.25 or 7.2.
Actually, it's based on the 7.2847, which is $2.1 million, $2,158,566. The other $85,000 that's in there is delinquent taxes that are paid. Usually we pick up some delinquent taxes during the year.
Do we know what that figure would look like if we didn't change taxes at all?
Under the current rate, you would bring in $1,714,093. If you went to the rollback rate, which is 5.2209, that would only bring in $1,547,031.
Is there a recommended number to roll back from what's in that general fund now, from the 7.28?
Well, to recommend, what you figure out the rollback rate would be what you would charge, the rate would be to bring in the exact same amount of money you're bringing in this year, based on, the reason why it would go down from 5.7 to 5.2 is because property values have gone up. But if you just wanted to bring in the same amount of money you brought in this year, you would go back to 5.2209. So, again, that's the basis there. What I wanted to talk about too on the next slide is the what we call balance forward cash. And basically what this is, the first thing we start with in the budget, even before the millage rate is looked at, we look at, okay, let's factor in how much we're going to take in revenue this year, how much we're going to spend out this year, and how much is going to be left over toward next year that we can put into next year's budget. And as you can see right off the top there, and the general fund, from what my estimates are, and you guys go out and do estimates on this, I estimated from now to the end of the year and all that and everything. It takes quite a while to do, and I had to do a quick time on it this time because I didn't have much time to do it, but it looks like you're going to spend close to $500,000 more this year than you have budgeted to take in this year. So,
Which is taken out of reserves.
which is taken out of reserves, which we'll get to later when we talk about the investment funds that you have up at, I guess it's Tallahassee or wherever you have them invested in.
Okay.
The 105 fund is your CRA, and as you can see there, basically you're bringing in more revenue than you're spending out, so you're going to carry over about $915,000 to next year's budget, in addition to the money you will be getting in from the county and the money the city puts into the CRA, which we can get, we can talk about that if you like later. Penny for Pasco, we have about $290,000 left over that's not going to be spent this year. Again, the confiscation, police training, that's in there. Police impact, they haven't spent any money this year, so the roughly $5,742 will roll over to next year. Fire impact, the same thing. Nothing's been spent out of it this year, so you're going to roll over about almost $19,000. Transportation impact fee, the same thing. Nothing's been spent from what I can see so far this year, and I assume nothing will be spent the rest of the year. There's only 2 months left to the end of the year. There's no capital. Water looks like they're going to roll over about $448,000. Stormwater about $84,000. Water impact fee about $83,000, and sewer impact fee about $208,000. So basically, all your funds are looking that you're not going to spend, you're going to take in more money than you're going to spend out this year, so you have money to carry over, except for the general fund.
But the issue is they're all restricted.
Yeah, well, any fund you look at here, they're restricted to that fund, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. The only one that's not restricted is general fund money, really.
Correct.
Okay, and then here we go with the millage rate, what we were talking about before. In other words, if you went to the rollback rate, the 5.2209, you'd bring in 1.5 million, which is approximately what you brought in this year into the budget from taxes. If you kept the rate current, you'd bring in 1.7 million. The reason why that goes up about $150,000, $170,000 is because property values have gone up. So if you use the same rate, your property values went up, so you're going to bring in more money. The proposed rate is 1.5 mils above the current millage rate. And again, you'll see what that brings in, 2.1. If the board wanted to, but now you can't because you've already set the millage rate to the property appraiser, you can always lower your rate, but you cannot increase it. Well, you can increase it, but you'd have to notify every taxpayer in the city by first-class mail, which is kind of highly prohibitive. People never do it, but if you would have, by majority vote here, if you would have voted 3-2, you could have went up high as 7.5704 for $2.2 million, or if you wanted 2/3 vote of the commission, you could go as high as 8.3 mils, and that would have brought in $2,467,000. But the bottom two you can't do now. Basically, you're restricted to the top 3 numbers up there. Make the air conditioning. All right, so that's a quick look at the revenue side. If you want to go over revenues, I got a sheet here that shows 3 years worth of prior year of actual revenues coming in, to what accounts and everything like that. I mean, we got it broken down. I don't know how much you want to get into that discussion tonight. Probably you'll want to have more of a discussion on the expenditures, because that would be that's we have more control over, so to speak, I would say, than the expense side.
I had a question.
Yeah.
And it's kind of directed at our city attorney. The CRA I wanted to kind of address, because I saw that line item in there. Is that something we have to do in a separate workshop, or is it something we can do during the general budget?
You can discuss it now. With regard to this, legally, the answer is this is a workshop. You cannot discuss anything except that what it was noticed for, okay? But since it's intertwined, you can discuss anything you want regarding the CRA budget here, okay? At some point in time, you're not going to make any voting here. You can't vote here tonight, okay? If you decide, look, I want to set it at this workshop at one above, or do something with the CRA, you just ask. Raise your hand who wants to do that, okay? It can be very informal. And then at your first formal budget reading, then you vote on what you want to do. So, but the short answer to your question is, yeah, you got to talk about CRA here. It's no problem whatsoever.
Well, I had a question on the CRA then.
Sure.
Because we carried a lot of money forward. Is that because we're holding that money to reimburse? Because it looks like we have that Restore Act project coming. And then we held, I think, $200,000 back. Is that part of what's being held back?
I believe you have $200,000 set aside. Is that the money for Nick's part?
The reason there's 900,000, Mr. Mayor, is in this year's budget, which ends September 30th, the council set $700,000 for the Restore Act. And the reason, even though it was, and you probably don't remember this, I remember doing it, you put 700 in the Restore Act because we were going to have to spend 700 and then get reimbursed. And we were concerned that you might not get reimbursed. And boy, we were right.
Correct.
Okay. And so if we had spent that money, because so that's why it was there, and so that's why you have a $700,000 carryover there. There was an additional $200,000 to do whatever you wanted, and I believe that's when it first said, well, let's use it for the lighting going forward. I pointed to you because I think you made the motion, sir.
So that explains the $900,000
that
being
does.
carried over.
Is that your answer? And I didn't
Okay.
think George would know that historically,
I
why.
wouldn't.
Okay, thank you. I just was trying to figure out why it was so high, but I knew that we had that money. The question is once that project is done, will that money be available to us again?
It's going to be available to, it's available to you right now, okay? And so when he does the budget, I don't want to speak for George, but you have X amount of dollars coming in for the new budget you're going to set, which he'll discuss with you.
On top of the $900,000 that we
Right,
carried
sir.
over? Right,
Yes.
okay.
Okay?
Thank you, that answers my question, but.
One other thing, Mayor, is that our attorney's exactly right. That's 667,000 plus or minus that would be used for channels 1 and 26A. We're getting closer, as I think I let the board know, based on Mr. Kinsella's question a couple of weeks back. The FDEP permit has been extended to October of 2021. So, we've got a little over a year. And I'm working with the Dewberry engineers to get past the draft stage and get it to the point where we can actually have something that we can send to Pasco County, because we'll still have to say grace over it before we get the green light. And obviously also, besides them saying grace, which slows us down some, the U.S. Treasury, which is where the Restore Act money actually resides. And so that's why once we get the green light to go out for bids, and then you award a bid, we'll have to have our $700,000 that you've indicated to pay the freight, if you will. Then once we go back and apply for reimbursement of the actual cost. And so that does take some time. And then I also have, back to a most recent conversation, I think in the last meeting this past Tuesday, question about Nick's boat ramp. I've got Chris Martin and one of his associates from Ayers, an associate, coming in next week to to talk with me about that project. We're getting ready to jump start it, kick it off, and that's where that $200,000 goes. And then also to talk with him about another infrastructure issue that Sean Uhas and I have been discussing now for a couple of weeks. Okay. So some of that money can and will be spent if it's the board's pleasure.
And you'll have stuff presented for us?
Yes.
Okay,
Sure,
thank you.
Okay, moving on to the expenditure side. of the proposed budget for next year. The summary here is, if you're looking at it, we break this down. There are like about 7 or 8 categories on the expense side that's broken down. Normally, it's broken down to personnel, operating, capital, grants, debt service, interfund transfers, and contingencies. And basically, if you look at the general fund right now, if we go through and budget for the $8 million, you're only going to have you only have money to put aside is about a little over $500,000 for reserves. So there's not very much reserves left in the general fund. Usually, rule of thumb is you try to keep at least around 25%, 1/4 of a year in reserve, because you got to remember you don't get your tax money in until December, usually December to January. December, a lot of it comes in, but you got to operate October, November, and part of December with no major source of money coming in, because your tax money hasn't come in yet. So the idea, what happens, they say, well, keep 25% in reserve, so this way it gets you through the hump of the first quarter of the year till your tax money comes in. So really, if you got an $8 million budget for the general fund, you probably should have about at least $2 million in reserve, and you only got like 500,000, so you're really cutting it close.
Well, now let's ask the question. We had $2 million at
Yeah.
one point.
Yes, you did, and again, I'll get to that because you had you actually had $6.5 million up in your investment funds, and that was broken down percentage-wise by finance people that took care of this before I came along, and they divided out, and yes, the general fund had about $2.2 million in those investment funds, but the problem is, if you want to balance your budget with the revenue coming in and the expenses going out, you're going to eat into that $2.2 million to the tune of about $1.7 million by the end of the year, so you're only going to have $500,000 left. You're spending a lot more than you got coming in next year.
But my cash forward is negative 400,000.
Right, so that's 500,000 right there that you're short, and then if you start drawing down on the $2.something million you have up in the investment funds, by the end of the year, you're only going to have $500,000 left of the $2.something million that you started out with.
But then it would be replenished upon next.
Well, no, that's money, one-time money that you put up there. That doesn't generate additional money. You know, you're gaining interest on it, but you're not getting very much interest. That's like one-time revenue you stuck up there into a savings account. Once you go into your savings account, unless you find revenue to come in to replenish it, you don't have any money to replenish it. And according to this budget, you will not have any to replenish it with.
So we're spending $1.7 million.
Over what you would probably get in this year in revenues.
Based on 7.28 tax.
That's it. And you got to remember, there's no increases for salaries or anything in this budget either. So you're holding it flat on all the employees, not getting any kind of a raise or anything. Yeah, the general fund is not pretty right now, to be perfectly honest with you.
I guess that's why the previous guy left.
So, and then we can discuss anything you want. The different departments, like I said, the department heads are here. You got white copies, I think, too, that for each department, we can pull out that department and you can actually see line item by line item what they asked for to spend in those budgets. And in the reverse is now, when you look at Community Redevelopment Fund, is basically you got $2.7 million, almost $2.8 million in reserves, because with the new money coming in, based on what the county is going to give you, they're going to give you a little over $1 million next year for the CRA, based on the taxable value and everything of the CRA district. And the general fund is also going to have to put another $900,000 into the CRA district, because I don't know if you're quite familiar how it works, though, is that you have a base year for the CRA, and every year you take your taxable value for the CRA district, which happens to be the whole city, and the difference between the base year and the new taxable value, and then you calculate how much tax you would gain on that based on your millage rate, and that's how much you have to put into the CRA district. So you would transfer the money from your general fund money coming in, taxes, into the CRA district. So you got basically next year $1.9 million coming into the CRA district on top of your $900,000 in reserve you got right now coming forward, or $900,000 of cash forward money. So you're looking at about $2.8, $2.9 million sitting in CRA money that you could spend.
And a bankrupt general fund.
Can I ask you, is that, because I know that one of the things that's happened in the past years is we've reduced CRA money into salaries, which would normally come from general fund, without raising the taxes. So I guess what's happened, if we did that, my theory is it's just drawing down on the general fund because we're not paying salaries out of the CRA. Is that, in
Right,
essence, what's
and,
going?
And I really don't know the stipulations for the CRA, what you can or can't spend out of that. I don't know if your attorney may be more familiar with that. This is the first city I've ever worked in where the CRA is the entire city. I've never had that before. I've had CRA districts before, but not the entire city. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that or not.
Unfortunately, I do. There's a line in a 30-page statute on CRAs that says you can have reasonable and associated expenses, you know, written off for salaries from the city. It doesn't say it that way, but yes, you can do that. And the policy of the council has been to reduce that, okay? So under pressure that they're excessive and various allegations made by political people. And so over the past few years, Mr. Mayor, what you're saying is what's done, but there was no associated cost cutting at the same time. So each time every year when the city manager stood up there and said, well, look what I did, I lowered this. Well, you know, the money's got to come from somewhere, you know what I mean? And so you're correct in your statement, but there's no set figure of what that is, and that's a case-by-case analysis, and, you know, whether it's fair now or not, I just know it's half as much as it used to be. It's the best answer I can give you.
So ask this question, essentially where we're at, if we raise taxes to compensate for that, what's going to happen is we're going to have a bunch of extra CRA money, then we're going to have available to do projects within the city anyways. Is that kind of the gist of what we're looking at?
Yeah, by you raising the taxes, you're going to get more tax money in, which means you're going to transfer more money into the CRA. Where this year was like $600 and something thousand, next year you're going to transfer in almost $900,000 because of the millage rate going up so high and the property values going up. But the question is, what do you use that on? And yeah, and the other thing, what I've done in the past is like cost allocation of that, but you usually have to, I always hear the words have a rational nexus. You have to have a reason for charging that much money to another fund for services you provide to that fund, and it's got to be rational. You got to be able to approve it, you know, to prove that you do that way. And I know Mr. Sossaman knows when we worked for Hernando County, we had a firm come in that did our cost allocation, which, to be perfectly honest with you, I thought was pretty cheap. I mean, for $9,000 a year, the general fund gained $4 million in cost allocation. So there are firms out that do that, and they're defensible in court. So, you know, that may be one way you may want to look at it to get a sizable amount that you could charge out of the CRA brought back into the general fund based on some rational nexus of coming up with it. I don't know if your lawyer agrees with that or not. But.
Well, and we're talking about just the CRA, but when we go back and look at the revenue coming in, there were other funds that, if they could be used for something that general fund would generally be used on, we had overages and balances going forward in pretty much every other fund.
And that's what I'm saying. What would happen is if you had cost allocation, you would have this firm would come in and give you a rational nexus on, okay, X fund, say special revenue, yeah, even special revenue fund or something like that, or utilities is a perfect example. How much can the general fund charge utilities for the services that the general fund provides for utilities, i.e. finance, budgeting, and all that? They would pay a part of the finance's budget back to finance in the general fund for work that they did for utilities. But you need somebody to do a rational nexus or come up with a way of, is this a legitimate amount?
That way you could charge it back and then reallocate back, so we're better off in general fund.
Right.
And so that's kind of what your recommendation is?
That's what I would look into with that into the future. In fact, it's always worked to the betterment of the general fund in the past. I mean, I think Mr. Sossaman has seen it that way too.
George is absolutely right. I thought it was extremely complicated, and it was, But as it's indicated, there's that nexus or connectivity, if you will, between the expenditure and what it's being used for and from which fund it's coming from. And so once that's established, and they just evaluated it every year, and it sure says it was a very de minimis cost for Hernando County, which is 190,000 people versus here, so it shouldn't be very expensive at all. But it will give us a better basis for cost allocation. And we would think that it would probably help to ensure the health going forward of the general fund, and still yet not really in danger of the CRA, which is really healthy. And then also what I like to do is have some time to sit down with our attorney and George and talk about his opinion in terms of where we can do some of these things, some of the projects that you've mentioned, Mayor, and some of the projects some other folks have mentioned. How can we use, whether it's impact money, water and sewer? And I know there's some, because I've already discussed it with them, that we need to take a look at. But then the bigger picture is that really big fund, which is obviously your CRA, and where can we legitimately spend that? Because once I hate to say it like this, but once the boundaries for the CRA were established to be coterminous with the city limits, it sort of kind of says under the law that the whole city's blighted. So if you could make a case for certain improvements to be done anywhere and use that CRA, Jim will probably shoot me tomorrow morning, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out a way to accomplish the things that this board has indicated to me in the short time I've been here in the most effective manner, and still yet keep all of our different funds healthy, if that makes sense.
What I was going to ask, is that something that would have to come to council to have someone come in to look at that to see if we can reallocate funds to rebuild the general fund, or is that something that you can do because of the amount of money involved?
It depends on how much you're allowed to spend without going to council for approval. I know probably the initial time would be a little more money, but I know like I said, for Hernando County, it was only $9,000 a year after the initial project was set up.
Yeah, if it's under that threshold, we would go ahead and proceed with it, because I think that's what I'm hearing a consensus now
So basically, we're just going to charge the other funds.
For the services we provide to those other funds.
To recirculate it back into the general fund.
Yes,
We do it,
because
but
if
we
it's
only
not
do it with
the same-
salaries.
I mean, to simplify it.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. I couldn't figure out what the prior accounting firm was doing, you know. No, but, okay, getting back, and you can see that, you know, the other funds here are pretty healthy with their reserves and everything. I mean, you know, the special revenue fund's got $500,000, and they're only small funds. The impact fee funds is really the capital improvement funds. They got over $1 million money to spend on, well, impact fees again, to use on growth in that. Water and sewer is pretty healthy with $2 million in reserve. Stormwater's got $352,000. You got total reserve contingencies for the city, basically about $7.2 million. It's just, the troubled one is the general fund.
So it's about balance right now.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Yep.
And then the next slide here, this is basically all the departments in the general fund, and basically how much it's costing the general fund to run those various departments. I mean, yeah, city council is only $24,000. You got to remember that also is that city council, your salaries are spread over 4 different funds. It's spread over the general fund, the CRA fund, the utility fund, I think. 3 funds, okay. But yeah, they're spread over, so that isn't your total budget, $24,000, but that's how much the general fund pays city council. And you can go down them, you know, all the way down. General government is basically all your operating supplies and everything for the general fund. Apparently, what they do here is instead of each department ordering their own supplies, it's almost like a central store. They order it in one place out of one fund, and then they share it among all the departments. Which again, that may be something else you may look at for cost allocation if some of those operating supplies are used by the utility department or something like that, water and sewer. Then you bring some money back into the general fund if they're going to use any of those supplies or anything.
I was going to ask, is that a typical allocation of a general store where you can't track costs across departments?
Any place I've worked, to be perfectly honest, and it's only been Pasco County, Crystal River, and Hernando County, each department buys their own supplies, really. I mean, they have
And it comes out of their individual
individual budgets, yeah. Normally that's the way it's done. I think Pasco a long time ago did have essential stores for tools and implements and shovels and things like that. I believe that's going back almost 30 years when I worked in Pasco County. So. But again, department heads are here. You can discuss any one of these departments' budgets you'd like, or go through them. It's whatever you'd like to do. We're here to answer your questions and do whatever we can to help you guys out. There's the rest of the general fund on the next page. There's some other, as you can see, there's your contingency at the bottom. That interfund transfer, you see the 967, that's what the general fund is going to have to put into the CRA the next fiscal year. That's how much that's building up the CRA fund, along with $1 million that's coming from the county. There's your community redevelopment. There's what each department is being paid for from the community redevelopment. Most of them is administration stuff and that. You won't see anything with the well, there's some fire department. You won't see the police department in there or anything like that being paid out of community redevelopment. I don't know if you can or not, but that's a legal question. Penny for Pasco. You can see the police department gets some money out of that, fire department, public works. The debt in Penny for Pasco, I believe, is the fire truck, the last payment. Becky, I think, the $31,000.
Correct, it's the last year of the fire truck.
Yeah, that's what that is.
Well, wouldn't that technically bump up now?
Excuse me?
Yeah, we're getting a new shiny new
Yeah,
fire.
but the new shiny fire truck and the new police cars, even though you're getting them this fall, the first payment on them aren't going to be due until the year 21, 22.
Oh, okay.
And Councilman, it will be more than the $31,000 based on.
Yeah, it's like $60,000
Yeah.
for their finance,
60 and change.
for the fire truck.
Yeah. So I mean, there's something right now, there's an expense you're going to be looking forward to, and not looking forward to it, but 21, 22 budget for how many years out you're going to be making those payments on the new cars and new fire trucks. So something in your back of your mind to remember, well, there's an expense I'm going to have to incur come those years.
It's, I think it's a 9-year financing deal, and that's put together, and I'm working on the final documents with Becky now for the 6 police cruisers that'll be coming in October. So we should have that completed and back to PNC. And for your information on that one, we got a rate of 2.72, I believe it was, which is really good.
But the Penny for Pasco was another fund that we had a lot of reserves in, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
$500,000.
$500,000 right now. I don't know how much was there in the past. I don't know, to be honest. Then you got your utility fund. Again, that's the different, again, a lot of this administration, this is finance, it's basically salaries that are coming back. It's not cost allocation type things. Because they got their own departments there. Stormwater utilities, another one. And this is the one I want to talk to you a little bit about too, is the investment funds. Back in August, I believe it was, of last year, they set up these 2 investment funds were set up, and money was put up. I don't know if it's in Tallahassee or actually where it is, but it's the Florida Fixed Income Trust and the Florida Class, it's called. And there was roughly $6.5 million put up there amongst the 7 funds. And I was told this is the way it was divided up. Currently, the way it is, the 6.5. But you're going to see what happens if this proposed budget passes. Like I told you, the general fund is going to come down to only, out of the $2.2 million they had up there, it's going to go down to 408. Community redevelopment doesn't have to pull any money down because they got plenty of money. Water and sewer, a little bit, not much. Stormwater, a little bit, but again, not much. Water impact fees aren't going to pull any of that money down. Sewer impact fees not going to pull any of that money down, but your $6.5 million, if this proposed budget passes, is going to drop down to $4.4 million. But again, the one I'm worried about is the general fund again. That's the one that's taking the beating because the expenses are so much higher than the revenues coming in. And that's basically the presentation in a nutshell. And just to remind you, first public hearing is September 10th. The second public hearing is September 24th. And we'll answer any questions or anything you need answered. Department heads are here. We can call in different budgets. I know you have, like I do, we have all the white sheets here with everybody's line item budgets in it.
George, if I may, I wanted to go back to the general fund, because you've done this for a long time.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was looking for recommendations for the board. I know that you said that trying to shift some of those funds around to provide some better balance is going to be probably our best avenue. Raising taxes is the other, but the other is clearly going to be making cuts.
Right. But the department heads aren't going to like what I'm going to say, but because of my short time here, only a month, normally what I would do is we'd start in like February sometime, and I would meet with every single one of the departments. They would put their budgets together. We'd sit down and go line item by line item. We'd bring the county city manager in, and for a better word for it, I'd have a red pen out, basically. And I didn't get a chance to do this. Everything that's in this budget is what everybody's asked for. I didn't get a chance to talk to any department heads, and with the time so short now, it's going to be very hard for me to sit down and start cutting away at people's budgets. It's just, it's the time factor involved.
For example, the 3 new firefighters that we're asking for budget, is that part of this budget, or is that not?
Yes, it's included in the general fund budget, yes.
But if we don't add that, that's going to be,
That'll be a savings to the
that'll
general
be
fund.
a big chunk of money that just goes back into general funds, correct?
Right, it'll be less money that eventually you'll have to draw down from your, what?
Fire department's separate, isn't it?
No, it's in the general fund.
General fund too, okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask a separate question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
If right now we have a budget line item of actual 2020 estimated spend. If we were to lock expenses to the 2020 spend, where would that put us in terms of our general fund?
You're saying that only budget for the money to cover your revenues coming in?
Essentially, I'm freezing all expenditures to the 2020 level.
Okay, well, it's going to go ahead and cut some of the stuff out of your budgets. Thing you have to remember, though, and we ran into it, a lot of times I ran into Hernando when I was doing it, there's expenses you're going to incur that are going to go up that you have no control over. You can't say, I'm going to leave this expense for insurance at X.
Agreed.
Because there's certain ones, and then the more of those that go up, that's even more you got to take away from other line items, and eventually you get to the point of laying people off, basically, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you got to be perfectly frank about the whole thing. I mean, Len's been through it when I've been through it. I mean, basically.
I think maybe, George, what Councilman's asking is if we could go back and take a look at it, and those that we can freeze. then
Correct.
freeze.
Anything that is controllable, obviously, we can't necessarily control health insurance or something
Right.
of that nature. But anything that is controllable within this city and freeze the expenditures back to the 2020 level, what does that do to our budget?
We could take a look at that, Councilman, and have that answer for you as quick as George can run that type of analysis.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at each one.
Because right now, in that budget, you have 3 additional fire department employees, which we've never had in the past. But we also, right now, I think we're budgeted for 3 more police officers that haven't been hired yet. Right now, you have 3 shifts that are open, don't you? 2 shifts that are open. Okay.
The other thing, Mayor, that
Yeah,
might
they would have been in the 2020 budget though, correct? So theoretically, those are still
That
in.
would be the same.
That would
So
stay
that
as
wouldn't
is.
change. The
That's
change
just
would be with
for-
the fire department.
Well, I mean, not to pick on them, but the big expenditure would be the fire department, but I'm assuming, because I'm looking just quickly across all of these, everyone's up a little bit for the most part. If we cut it back, where does that put us? How close does that put us? And then, because I personally also don't want to necessarily go back to our citizens and saying remember that 1.5 mils that we said we weren't going to hit, and here we are at 1.5 mils.
Well, we
That's
could,
the exact point. So you have to keep in mind the cuts or the freezing, couple that with the 1.5, we have to figure that out. Because if we
Correct.
drop that back down,
Again, but
we maybe end up in a washing it.
I don't want to say we're at plus 1.5 and we have all these expenses.
Drop the
Plus, we're
expenditures, But
only.
we may have to drop expenditures and raise the.
I'm not saying we're not going to have to.
Well, how much, Is it possible to figure out what we can do to kind of balance it better from other funds before the end of this budget year? Is that even possible?
I'm sure it's possible. I mean, anything's possible. It's just putting in the time. I mean, yeah, I can get started, on it tomorrow. I'll just start going line item by line item, and from time to time, and Mr. Sossaman sit with me, and we can get some of the department heads in, and I'm sure there are places they can cut. I mean, yeah, like I said, people aren't going to love me for a while, but that's the nature of what I do, so.
There may
No,
be-
that's
Right
fine.
now, basically, we're spending $1.7 million more than we did last year, through some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Well, it's been eating up also because we haven't been increasing our millage rate either
Well,
over
yeah, but
time.
from last year to this year, we're essentially spending $1.7 million.
Right.
I don't know if we spent more as much as we didn't use CRAs to pay some of the salary, so it was just shifted to another fund. I think that's part of the
And
problem.
That may be
still
part
got
of it,
spent.
but yeah,
Yeah.
it's still a spend.
Right.
And
It's
then
spent
the-
out of the general fund is what happened
Yeah,
instead of
correct.
CRAs.
And the
so-
other thing you got to worry about too is looking on the revenue side, you're probably going to take a little bit of a hit in sales tax in that because of the virus and all that, and businesses being closed. So you're going to take a lower amount of revenue maybe coming in next year than you had coming in this year too.
That was one of the reasons we suggested raising up.
I mean, the ideal scenario is we transfer some monies back out of CRA and the other funds. We cut expenditures down, and then we probably will have some sort of a modest tax increase, and that gets us at least from a 2.2 million to or a $400,000 in reserves to something a little more sustainable.
We'll take a look at that. We'll look and see what we can freeze, as you've suggested. And we'll look at the capital items too, because there might be areas that, say, are restricted, where some of the equipment has been asked to come out of general fund. So we might take a look, go back and see with our attorney if it is possible, and if it is, then that would save the general fund some. And like you say, maybe if we can bring it back down and not have to do what's that word, reduction in force, RIF, some people call it, which is an ugly word, and I hate to even think about it, because I hate to see anybody lose their job. But I'd like to be able to bring it back to you with a moderate type or modicum tax increase if it's necessary, with things frozen like was suggested earlier tonight, at the 2020 level, and then what you've also mentioned, Councilman.
Just one misstatement there. You cannot take any money from that CRA. That's special.
No, I meant through the cost allocation.
No, we can't do it there either. That's the whole point.
He just said
Everything but the CRA. In other words,
Talking about
right
like
now
utilities and
we
such.
could pay expenses off the CRA for salaries, and we've been reducing those. You could go back and charge more, but you can't move any other monies between the CRA. That's
Maybe I'm confused, because didn't you just say we could?
Well, with the attorney saying
Yeah, I
is
think it's just better
that you could
terminology.
probably go back and increase what you've been taking.
you could increase. That's the only way you're going to get money from the CRA is the reverse. Increase it.
Increase it, charge more of your salary to the CRA.
Right.
Which lowers the money you're spending in the general fund then.
Which is why we've had the low rates for a long time, so, but
Also, just remember the fire department would like to speak to, we're trying to get our attention.
I did, the only other thing I was gonna ask, are you gonna have time, George, are you gonna have time to have a red pen and meet with some of the department heads before our next budget meeting, or is that asking too
Well,
much?
when's the next budget meeting? If it's gonna be tomorrow, no, I don't know that.
2 weeks from tonight is
Two.
next one at 6:30. So
All right.
I would definitely think that by that time, yes, we could.
Oh, yeah, well, that's what I'll just schedule meetings right away with the city manager, and we'll sit down. I mean, that's what I was brought in here to do, to get your budget in line, and so that's my main focus on doing everything right now, is just budget.
George is here, obviously, and he's been talking for however long we've been in here, and then each of the department heads are here, so they can schedule a time to start coming in whatever time's convenient for them tomorrow. So we'll start that early.
And I wanted to thank both you gentlemen. I know you've put a lot of work and time in and coming into this at the last minute because of city management turnover. So I wanted to thank you for all your efforts and your work. I know that the fire department wanted to address the council. So if you want to come on up you can address us.
Excuse me. Again, this is new for us because normally we have our meetings and everything for them. So I want to apologize for the fact that we weren't aware until this is the first time we're seeing the presentation also. We weren't aware of your guys' budget shortfalls. So I actually had a discussion with the chief, and we're gonna go ahead and hold off on our 3 positions, because we weren't aware of your general fund.
Neither were we.
Yeah, your general fund shortfall, so please don't think that we had intentions of trying to come to you guys for this. So I spoke with the chief, that's kind of what we were
You
discussing.
got a new
back there.
fire truck, you
Yeah,
got all
we
excited, we
are,
know how it works.
We will, yes, we eventually would like to get to this position to have 3 personnel per shift for safety, production on fires, to come, at least try to start heading towards meeting a standard. But obviously, right now, and having fiscal responsibility is not possible. So we will come back to you with not having 3 personnel per shift.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And then the other thing that we probably are going to have to address, either now or in 2 weeks, but we may want to address it now, is with, is this the time when we talk about whether or not there's going to be, because there were no raises baked in here either.
Right.
No.
I could tell you how much more it's gonna cost you for the raises, if you wanna know that.
I'm just curious, because I think in all fairness,
Okay.
we still need to at least consider that.
If you're gonna give a 1% raise, it's gonna cost the general fund $26,787. Overall, it's $39,082 if you give overall the departments that have salaries in it. 2% overall for everybody would be $78,000. General fund is $53,000 of that. 3% is $117,000, and it's $80,000 of that is in the general fund. 4% would be $156,000. Of $107 would be in the general fund. And if you want 5%, it's $195,000, $133,000 that would come out of the general fund.
We can stop
Yeah,
there,
we
probably.
can stop at 2 or 3.
I just figured, I go 1 to 5, what the heck,
George did exactly what I asked him to do. I said, how about it go from 1 to 5? Because then I said, and then that way he gets the board. And what I'll ask George to do too is we can send that to you tomorrow, so in case you didn't write it down.
Yeah, if you could send it
Yeah.
over, that'd be perfect.
Right, George?
Yeah, I got it, right here, just make copies and send it to them.
And then the only other thing is, one of the goals that I was going to try and look to do as you guys are balancing the budget, I know I'm asking a lot, is to see if we can budget it to where if we raise taxes, we can still keep it either at or under 7%. To go up a full 1.5% was something that I was kind of opposed to when it was proposed.
If we roll it back to flat 7, it would be like a 1.25 approximately increase.
I think part of that solution is actually going to come back if we roll back the expenses to the 2020 level. What does that give us and where
Yeah.
does that put us?
Will you be able to cut the millage rate any? is what we're
Exactly.
looking for,
So
yeah.
does that bring us back? So if we lock expenses to 2020 level across the board, well, where feasible across the
Right.
board, see where that puts us, and then we can see what we can increase from CRA and massage it somewhat.
Well, I think we would want to increase out of the other funds, utilities,
Well, that's what he said, we're gonna roll something.
Right,
from 5,
sure.
Roll some of that
But-
back around into the general fund.
but
Yeah.
We're gonna go until Jim screams.
No, that's. We could have brought those to you like that,
Yeah.
because we used to in the past,
Mhm.
but he just got this through.
but
No, he's doing phenomenal. It's-
He would have done that, he would have had that.
But if
Yeah.
we're taking those 3 positions out,
That's $100,000.
That's $100,000 right there.
that's $100,000. So that's going to put us to where we can actually have a little wiggle room to bring that tax base down just a little bit, I would
Well,
think.
let's not, because we still went from a $2.2 million reserve to a $400,000
Correct. No, I
reserve,
saw
which
that.
is dangerously low.
Yeah.
So we got $1.7 million to come up with, roughly, or say 1.5, 1.4,
Okay.
for safety's sake.
The question is, what kind of timelines are we looking at? Are you guys going to be able to accomplish what you need to do in the next 2 weeks?
I can do what you're asking to be done, I just don't know if we can get that much cuts in there
Okay,
without any severely hurting anything.
okay.
One other question, and when we were talking about the general administrative fund where everyone goes like the central shop, did you see any cost savings as a result of that, or was that more just more of an accounting thing?
It's an accounting thing, and it could come out to hurt you more than do good, only because if departments go ahead and start ordering their own supplies and everything, It might be more costly in the end, to be honest. I'm just being honest about the whole thing.
What might help though is when we do the cost allocation, Councilman, if we leave the central store, as George called it, as is, and then cost allocate it based on the usage that would be analyzed by the firm that we choose, then they can probably use the same basis to allocate as they would salaries and others. So I think we could probably still leave it there, because usually if you're buying bulk, and I know we buy more at one time, you usually get a better price.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's all I had.
That's all I have, till we hear the numbers come back.
And I don't think we have, we generally don't open it to comments from the public, but we'll take comments from the public at the beginning of the next meeting. Is that correct, procedurally?
It's a workshop. Must have been something I said. It's a workshop, so from a legal standpoint, the only requirement is that you give them a chance to address the crowd. At a workshop, generally what you're supposed to do is set what you're going to do at the workshop, you know, who's going to speak. Do you understand me? You could bring in a speaker in here, which George, so you don't have to. You can if you want, I mean, but you don't have to. Yeah, there's no old business, you know.
Okay. Let's do this. We've received a lot of information. Let's wait for general comments at the next meeting, and then we'll have a couple weeks to process everything, take general comments, and then come back and reconvene. When we reconvene, we'll make sure we give time for general comment to the public. So, Mr. Mueller, come on up.
Thank you. I specifically indicated that I wanted to speak.
That's fine. You reserved your time, so I'm
Yes,
okay with that.
I did. I reserved my time. And thank you, George. I thought you did a very good job given the time frame, and I know because I've been in your shoes. But I think one of the tools that I think that you guys are lacking is a side-by-side comparison of where this budget stands compared to what our run rate would be given our actuals year-to-date plus what we anticipate incurring between now and the end of our fiscal year. That would at least show you where the deltas are, where the pressure points are, and opportunities to go into each area. A couple of other ideas that I have here. I did not see a total headcount picture. I saw names on a page, but perhaps if we look at that with a physical headcount in each department to understand where we stand today, where that stands in the future budget, it would give you some perspective there. I already mentioned something about zero-base all these positions and ensure that we've got the adequate number of folks working in each function so that, you know, we're covered. And some of the hard questions that you guys might have to consider is to assign targets to meet that $1.7 million reduction so that you can achieve something that's still workable. And there again, it might have some negative consequences in that we're going to have to do without some things. But at the same time, we do need to be aware of our fiscal responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I could say one thing, we're
Yes,
talking about
George.
zero-based budgeting. If I had the time, and what I've always done in the past with budgets I've done that started like in February time, is actually we do start at zero base. People come in with zero, and they're gonna have to justify every line out of every person to me at these meetings we used to have.
I like that.
Yeah, it's just I didn't have the time to do it right now.
I don't blame you for that.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments?
I do have one. I'm kind of looking at the white sheets right here quickly. When we are establishing back to the 2020, we're going to the 2020 actual spend, correct? Estimated spend.
Yeah, not the budget. I'd go to look what was being spent.
Correct. All right, perfect. I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yeah.
And with that, I was looking for a motion. To adjourn, right, or no?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.